A lonely millionaire obsessed with work was left in shock after receiving a call from the hospital. "Sir, a baby girl has just been born, and she is supposedly yours." The day had started very early for Andrew Carter, a serious-looking man who rarely took his eyes off his phone. As the CEO of TechWave, a rapidly growing tech company, he had become accustomed to issuing orders even before the sun rose. His daily routine always included reviewing dozens of emails, overseeing statistics, and running meetings where he demanded immediate results. From the conference room with large windows, he would gaze at the city skyline, reminded that every minute away from his desk was, in his view, wasted time. Few people knew the Andrew who existed beyond the numbers and the spreadsheets. His personal assistant, Isabella Martinez, vaguely remembered the younger, more relaxed, visionary man he had been years ago. But over time, he had transformed into a relentless perfectionist, unable to allow personal distractions. Andrew rarely attended family dinners or social gatherings, and when he did, his mind was always anchored in the expansion plans he constantly devised for TechWave. That's why, when his phone rang insistently that day, he assumed it was just another business emergency. With the receiver pressed to his ear, he heard a nervous voice announcing that it was from a local hospital. At first, Andrew thought it was a misunderstanding or some administrative matter. However, his expression suddenly changed when he was informed that a baby had just been born and that, according to the mother's records, he was listed as the father. The phrase thundered in his mind like a lightning strike. "Mr. Carter, Sophia is supposedly your daughter." Andrew, who usually kept his composure even in the worst financial crises, felt his hand shake as he held the phone. For a moment, he felt disoriented, as if he had been cast adrift in a sea without a compass. His responses were reduced to monosyllables, unable to form a coherent sentence. Still unable to process the news, he ended the call with a promise to come to the hospital as soon as possible. But before that, his corporate instinct drove him to search for evidence. He needed to confirm that this wasn't a fraud attempt. Minutes later, his office was filled with the presence of the two men closest to Andrew in the business world: Charles Smith, his CFO and trusted friend, and Isabella, the assistant who was always on top of every corporate move. Seeing Andrew's disoriented expression, they both knew something serious was happening. Barely exchanging greetings, he dropped the news. "I just got a call from a hospital. They say I'm the father of a newborn." Both Charles and Isabella exchanged astonished looks, trying to process the information. They knew of Andrew's past, of a few fleeting relationships, but they had never heard him speak of a potential fatherhood. After a tense silence, Andrew clarified that he wouldn't take any steps until verifying the authenticity of the documents. He ordered Charles to contact the company's legal team to confirm the details and asked Isabella to get the medical history of the mother, Laura Gomez. He wanted to know who she was, why she had claimed he was the father, and most importantly, what she wanted with such an accusation. Even though his voice sounded firm, a small doubt crept into the back of his mind. What if the baby really was his daughter? While the legal department mobilized, Travis Velasco, a board member whose reputation was not always the clearest, appeared at the door. Travis had risen quickly through the ranks and, on more than one occasion, had shown a tendency to conspire to achieve his goals. With his calculated smile, he asked if he could interrupt for a moment. Trying to conceal his anxiety, Andrew responded that he was busy, but Travis insisted he needed to discuss some urgent matters related to a new international merger. Under Charles's watchful eye, Andrew postponed the conversation about the baby and attended to Travis, not revealing any of what had just occurred. However, the phone call kept echoing in Andrew's mind with unbearable persistence. His obsession with controlling every aspect of his life clashed with the possibility of a little girl bearing his surname. For the first time, he felt torn between his corporate world and a personal situation he couldn't handle with a simple memo or a bank deposit. After the brief chat with Travis, he let out a deep sigh and asked Isabella to handle everything related to the hospital. She assured him she would do so immediately, trying to project a calm determination that contrasted with the pallor on her boss's face. As the afternoon wore on, calls from the legal team confirmed that Laura Gomez appeared in TechWave's databases as a collaborator in a social project partially funded by the company, although no one had heard from her in months. This sparked another curiosity in Andrew's mind. How was it possible that he didn't remember the woman? Had she been just an occasional contact at a corporate event? The uncertainty hit him hard. By evening, with the building nearly empty, Andrew sat behind his large desk, looked at the financial reports of the day, and realized he couldn't focus. His phone kept vibrating with reminders of meetings and pending messages, but nothing was as urgent as that news. Before leaving the office, he gazed at the city lights through the window and, in an unusual act for him, allowed himself to feel a flicker of vulnerability. The future he had so meticulously planned seemed about to take an unexpected turn, one that would force him to reconsider just how far the boundaries of his flawless organization could stretch. He had entered that morning as an invincible man, confident in himself. He was leaving totally disoriented, knowing that a simple phone call had shattered his apparent shield of self-sufficiency. With a tired gesture, Andrew grabbed his briefcase and left the office, already aware that nothing would ever be the same. The image of the newborn, whom he barely knew by phone, had settled in his mind and threatened to shake the very foundations of his life. The first rays of sunlight found Andrew Carter wide awake, having failed to get any sleep. He had spent the night pacing around his penthouse, juggling overdue calls and overwhelming thoughts. Even so, at the crack of dawn, he showed up at his office, frowning and phone in hand, awaiting word from his legal team. He needed clarity regarding the call he had received, and, above all, to verify whether that baby girl, Sophia, was truly his biological daughter. Shortly after his arrival, TechWave's lawyers called him into a brief but tense meeting. Spread out on the table were copies of hospital documents and registration forms that almost undeniably confirmed Laura Gomez's statement as the child's mother. The legal team had spoken with the hospital director and also reviewed records confirming preliminary paternity tests, all pointing straight at Andrew. In an atmosphere of total perplexity, they told him that, in their professional opinion, the most prudent move was to at least tentatively accept that Sophia was indeed his daughter. Andrew, still in disbelief, tried to keep his composure, but his hands clenched around the papers. Deep down, he hoped it was a mistake, a ruse by someone seeking money, or perhaps the fame that came with his name. Yet all the evidence suggested the news was true. Although he still clung to the hope of finding a loose end somewhere, he couldn't help the faint hint of fear running down his spine. For the first time in years, he faced a problem he couldn't fix by writing a check or using corporate strategies. Still unsettled, Andrew decided to go to the hospital in person to confirm the facts and maybe find Laura Gomez. Part of him hoped the woman would suddenly appear to clear up the situation and deny everything. Upon arriving, he found a cold, quiet atmosphere typical of a maternity ward, where the cries of newborns mingled with the murmurs of nurses and exhausted mothers. After identifying himself at reception, he was directed to the room where Sophia was staying. The moment he stepped in, his gaze landed on the baby girl sleeping peacefully, unaware of the chaos her existence had unleashed in that man's life. The attending nurse invited him to come closer, and in a gesture he himself didn't fully understand, he gently stroked the baby's tiny hand. In that instant, something very different from business logic stirred inside him. He felt a soft tremor, an emotional jolt far removed from any high-level meeting or expansion plan. Sophia opened her eyes for a moment, gazing at him with disarming innocence, and Andrew, without warning, felt a lump in his throat. Caught between confusion and surprise, he decided he needed someone trustworthy to care for the baby while he provisionally dealt with the whirlwind that was about to unfold. He immediately contacted a specialized pediatric care agency. They recommended Marta Lopez, an experienced nurse who, besides being an excellent nanny, was well versed in health protocols and newborn routines. He arranged a quick interview with her at the hospital, and after hearing her calm, confident tone, he didn't hesitate. He hired her on the spot. Returning to TechWave was no easy task. News of Andrew's supposed fatherhood had already spread through some internal circles, and the office felt charged with curiosity. Travis Velasco, a board member whose ambitions went far beyond the merely professional, didn't waste any time making himself heard. Masking his words in apparent concern, he noted that the CEO seemed distracted and that his sudden involvement in personal matters could jeopardize the company's success. In subsequent meetings, Travis repeated, with an increasingly pointed tone, that TechWave needed stability and strong leadership, subtly implying that Andrew was more absent than usual. Charles Smith, meanwhile, tried to extend a helping hand to his friend. He offered to cover some of Andrew's responsibilities while he sorted out the situation with the baby, but Andrew, stubborn by nature, refused to delegate the most important projects. In his mind, nothing and no one could strip him of absolute control over the company's next steps. However, whenever he picked up the phone to check his emails or call a business partner, his thoughts would drift back to the hospital corridors and the image of Sophia in her little crib. This mental strain became increasingly evident in the way he spoke, in his distant gaze, and in the tension in his posture. Inevitably, that same night, Sophia arrived at Andrew's home, under Marta's care. The sleek, minimalist penthouse, once a perfect reflection of his obsession with order, was soon disrupted by improvised cribs and baby gear that didn't quite fit the immaculate decor. Marta proved efficient and understanding, ready to attend to Sophia at any hour, but she also sensed the immense tension in that home, completely lacking any hint of familial warmth. As he shut down his computer close to midnight, Andrew realized that his life had changed irreversibly. Between the looming pressure from Travis at the board level and the unexpected responsibility of caring for Sophia, the beginnings of a crisis were already taking shape, one that threatened to topple his carefully structured priorities. Lost in conflicting thoughts, he couldn't shake the certainty that, from that moment on, everything he had built would revolve around the little girl who had just burst into his world. Morning broke with an unusually grey sky over the city, mirroring the tension settling over Andrew Carter's life. For 2 days now, Sophia had been living under his roof, and the once flawlessly minimalist penthouse was beginning to succumb to the chaos that accompanies a newborn. Even so, Andrew remained determined to maintain his routine of meetings and business commitments, albeit now from home, so he could keep an eye on the baby. In every work call, Sophia's cries intruded like a constant reminder that everything had changed. Marta Lopez, the experienced nurse and nanny, displayed infinite patience with the baby. Yet even with all her skill, she sometimes found moments when nothing could soothe Sophia. Between bottles and lullabies, she explored the nooks and crannies of the penthouse and gradually grew accustomed to Andrew's reserved nature. He, in turn, watched her out of the corner of his eye, torn between gratitude and distrust, still unwilling to admit he truly needed help with something as fundamental as raising his own daughter. While Andrew was caught up in an endless stream of video conferences, Isabella Martinez decided to tackle a matter that had been on her mind for days. She had meticulously sifted through TechWave's digital files, looking for references to Laura Gomez, Sophia's mother, and her connections to the company. The sparse mentions pointed to an old philanthropic project which, according to records, had been put on hold with no clear explanation. During her search, Isabella discovered that at the main office there was still a small desk that had belonged to Laura, located in a nearly forgotten part of the building. When she mentioned this to Andrew, he simply nodded. Though he was interested in possibly finding clues about Laura, his mind was overloaded by corporate demands and Sophia's cries. It was Marta who, upon hearing the conversation, offered to accompany Isabella. After all, she had a couple of free hours while the baby slept. Reluctantly, Andrew agreed, emphasizing that he needed to know every detail they found at the woman's old workstation. Once they arrived at TechWave's facilities, Isabella and Marta noticed the contrast between the frenzied activity of the main corridors and the near-total abandonment of the wing where Laura's small desk was located. There, silence prevailed over the usual bustle of the company, suggesting no one had set foot there in quite some time. Turning on the lights, they saw dust floating in the air, revealing piles of folders, scattered papers, and some personal belongings left behind. Carefully, they began to go through the most visible documents. They found a set of notes about a philanthropic program aimed at bringing technology and education to rural communities. Curiously, the dates matched the period when Laura was active at the company. Each sheet mentioned donations and budgets, but also contained annotations highlighting hurdles and obstacles within TechWave. There were names of employees and executives, requests for authorizations, and emails that hinted at a strange tension. Suddenly, Marta found a folder labeled Diversions Urgent. Upon opening it, they discovered a detailed record of money movements that didn't align with the project's objectives. Large sums appeared with no justification, and scrawled in the margin was the note, "High-level executive did not approve this report." Isabella paused to read carefully, and while the name of the individual wasn't explicitly stated, the word executive recurred alongside warnings that the accounts could be manipulated. Everything seemed to point to someone with enough power to block Laura's initiatives. As she scanned each line, Isabella found herself thinking of Travis Velasco, the ambitious board member whose reputation was already plenty murky. After finishing their inspection, Isabella decided to pack all the documents into a briefcase so she could show them to Andrew and the legal team. Before leaving, Marta noticed an empty photo frame in a drawer, as if someone had removed the picture. She wondered if it might have been a photo of Laura, or perhaps of a colleague who had vanished from the company's radar. Whatever it had been, it added yet another layer of mystery to the already puzzling disappearance of Sophia's mother. Hours later, back at the penthouse, they encountered a scene that, under other circumstances, might have been comical. Andrew had one hand on his laptop keyboard and the other holding the inconsolably crying baby. The exasperation on his face spoke volumes. Every time he connected to a video call, Sophia seemed to pick that exact moment to demand attention. Marta hurried to take the child, managing to soothe her with rhythmic motion and some breathing techniques, while Isabella stepped in quietly so as not to disturb the virtual meeting the CEO was trying to wrap up with some semblance of dignity. When Andrew finally ended the call and leaned back in his chair with a sigh, Isabella seized the moment to tell him what they had found. He listened with a furrowed brow, showing genuine interest as soon as the word corruption came up. Any internal threat to TechWave was intolerable to him, but there was something else in his expression when Laura and the philanthropic program were mentioned. Perhaps a hint of surprise at discovering that Sophia's mother might have been involved in something far more complex than he had imagined. Meanwhile, Isabella and Marta's relationship was growing stronger. It was the first time they spent moments together outside of strictly assigned tasks, and both agreed that something more serious surrounded Laura's disappearance. Their exchange of information gave rise to a newfound bond that contrasted with Andrew's distant demeanor, still focused almost entirely on corporate matters. Nonetheless, his apparent aloofness cracked slightly when, in the middle of the night, Sophia started crying again, and he rushed to pick her up before Marta could get there. Something about the baby was gradually disarming this man so obsessed with work. Though his face remained tense, it was impossible not to notice how his features softened, if only for an instant, whenever he held Sophia. That barely perceptible change hinted at the beginning of a transformation that could shake his entire foundation. And, while the looming shadow of an internal conspiracy was taking shape on the horizon, it was clear that Andrew's sense of fatherly duty was starting to take root in his heart with an unexpected firmness. It was a cloudy afternoon when Julia Carter, Andrew's older sister, showed up at the penthouse door. Her arrival took everyone by surprise, especially Marta, who had just gotten used to Sophia's daily presence. Julia, carrying a bag and an uneasy expression, couldn't hide the urgency that had driven her to barge unannounced into her brother's life. She had heard about the baby from an acquaintance at the hospital and, unable to reach Andrew directly, decided to show up without warning. Unlike her brother, who lived surrounded by luxuries and constant obligations, Julia led a simpler life in the outskirts of the city. Married with 2 young children, she kept a stable household where family came first. Stepping into the spacious living room, she immediately noticed traces of an unusual chaos: bottles, diapers, and baby supplies scattered across what, until recently, had been a flawlessly immaculate setting. It was almost surreal for anyone who knew Andrew's methodical, order-obsessed ways. While Marta introduced herself politely, Julia waited until her brother appeared. Andrew was wearing his usual dark suit, phone in hand, stress etched on his face, with no thought of properly receiving his sister. Their meeting was drenched in tense silence. Julia fixed her gaze on him and told him, bluntly, that they needed to speak privately. With a look somewhere between startled and resigned, Andrew pointed to a secluded spot, away from the bustle where Sophia was napping. "Why didn't you pick up my calls?" Julia demanded in a flat tone that betrayed her restrained anger. "I've been trying to reach you for days, and now I find out you have a daughter." Andrew pressed his lips together, exhaling before responding. He explained, using few words, that he hadn't had time to tell her anything because the events had taken him by surprise. He excused himself, citing the countless responsibilities on his shoulders, but immediately collided with his sister's disapproving stare. "It's always the same, Andrew. Everything revolves around your work, your meetings, your mergers, and that obsession with numbers. Where does family fit into all this?" Julia challenged. "Do you think that just because Dad left us when we were kids, you have an excuse to follow in his footsteps?" The mention of their late father dredged up bitter memories Andrew preferred to bury. The man had abandoned them when they were very young, consumed by his own businesses and devoid of affection for his children. Julia and Andrew had each grappled with emotional scars in their own way. She sought out a stable family life, while he threw himself into business with near fanatical dedication. "I'm not repeating the same pattern," Andrew said, trying to keep his voice in check. "I'm doing everything I can so none of this affects TechWave's progress. I have obligations I can't neglect overnight." "And yet you're already neglecting them," Julia countered, rather bluntly. "In the end, a child is what matters most. And if you don't want her in your life, at least be honest with yourself. And with her." The tension rose higher than either of them had intended. While they argued, Isabella, who had come to deliver some documents, overheard bits of the conversation. She didn't dare intervene, but her eyes reflected the discomfort of revisiting, in part, a past that felt all too familiar. She had experienced Andrew's coldness herself, back when their relationship had fallen apart because he prioritized the company over any emotional ties. Once Julia calmed down a bit, Andrew took the opportunity to ask about her family and how she had managed to track him down. She explained she'd received mixed messages and that rumors in the city hinted at a looming media scandal, a millionaire with a newborn daughter he hadn't even acknowledged. Although the press had yet to pounce on the story, Julia's inner circle believed it was only a matter of time. Despite the tension, Julia's presence seemed to stir something positive in Andrew. Possibly because of the childhood memories they shared or the unflinching way she held up a mirror to him, he began to feel guilty about his aloofness. After the argument, Julia insisted on seeing Sophia. When they entered the room where the baby slept, she noticed Andrew approach the crib with a slight hesitance, as though afraid that a sudden movement might upset the little girl. Marta was in the room talking with Isabella about feeding schedules. Seeing Julia enter, Marta immediately perceived the family tension and stepped out to give them space. Isabella, however, stayed in a corner, pretending to leaf through papers, when in truth she didn't want to miss the family moment. That was when the first major sign of change manifested in Andrew. Without anyone prompting him, he awkwardly picked Sophia up, holding her against his chest. The baby opened her eyes and clung to his suit with her tiny hands. For a few seconds, she stopped crying, seemingly comforted by her father's presence. Andrew, breathing unsteadily, felt a strange rush of emotion, a lump in his throat urging him to close his eyes and, for a moment, forget all his work-related pressures. Julia watched in mild astonishment, and after a few moments, a faint smile crept onto her face. Though she didn't say it out loud, she noticed a slight tremble in her brother's shoulders, as if the armor of his relentless CEO persona had finally cracked. Isabella, moved by the scene, forced herself to refocus on the documents in her hands, hoping to mask the surge of emotion she felt watching something so surreal. Andrew, at last, revealing the vulnerability he had concealed for so long. However, the calm was short-lived. A message on Andrew's phone snapped him out of the moment with Sophia. It was an alert from the board of directors. Travis Velasco was calling an emergency meeting to address urgent matters regarding a new project. Julia took her leave, warning him she would continue keeping an eye on the baby's situation. As for Isabella and Marta, they exchanged a meaningful look, both aware that Sophia's arrival was changing Andrew more rapidly than he himself was willing to admit. The day ended with a stark realization. Andrew's family wouldn't let him repeat the tale of abandonment that had marked his childhood. Julia's presence, the memory of an absent father, and the undeniable warmth that little Sophia demanded at every turn revealed a small, yet very real shift. Though his corporate facade still held strong, something inside Andrew had begun to move, sowing the hope that this time his priorities might be different. The next morning dawned with an air of anticipation at TechWave. An urgent board of directors meeting had been called, and all the company's top executives moved about restlessly, sensing that something big was in the works. Andrew Carter arrived at the boardroom with a stern expression. En route, he mentally reviewed the data from ongoing projects and rehearsed the arguments he would use to quash any doubts about his leadership capabilities. Even so, he couldn't stop fleeting images of Sophia from sneaking into his thoughts. Ever since the little girl had entered his life, his focus hadn't been the same. With all members seated around the large oval table, the meeting began in a standard procedural manner. After a brief financial report, Travis Velasco took the floor, exuding excessive self-assurance. In a measured tone, he emphasized the need for strong, unwavering leadership, especially in light of the new challenges TechWave faced on the international market. Subtly, without mentioning Andrew by name, he questioned the company's media presence, which he claimed was being tarnished by rumors about the CEO's personal life. He spoke of untimely distractions and moral fatigue, warning that they could lead the company to fall behind. Andrew felt the eyes of several board members on him, including those of Charles Smith, his CFO and friend, who looked notably uncomfortable. It was clear that Travis wasn't just making idle attacks. He intended to persuade everyone that the CEO was in a fragile state. Andrew fought the urge to reply with bitterness. He knew that any sign of emotional turmoil would confirm Travis's suspicions. Thus, he chose to maintain an appearance of calm and spoke up to highlight TechWave's recent successes and the favorable projections for the next quarter. Still, a few in the room noticed his voice lacked its usual firmness. When the meeting ended, Charles discreetly approached him. He mentioned that although he continued to support him, even he had to admit Andrew's constant distractions and absences were conspicuous. Several deadlines had been postponed, and some international partners were starting to demand explanations. Though Charles didn't say it outright, he implicitly urged Andrew to make a clear decision. Either reorganize his personal life so it wouldn't affect the company, or delegate critical responsibilities to trusted colleagues. The CFO warned that straddling both worlds would only make things worse. Andrew, slightly unsettled by his friend's bluntness, said nothing. Deep down, he understood that TechWave was handling key projects that couldn't afford a wavering leader. But at the same time, he felt a stirring in his chest at the thought of Sophia. He couldn't stand the idea of neglecting the baby, and his sister Julia's recent visit still echoed in his mind, reminding him of the consequences of having an absent father. A short while later, after the boardroom had cleared, Charles met in private with Isabella Martinez. For days, They had been investigating the documents concerning the philanthropic project Laura Gomez had worked on. Among the recovered files and folders, there were clear signs of embezzlement and irregular transactions. Meticulous as ever, Isabella had created a chronological map of the suspicious transactions. Charles was taken aback to see that the amount of misappropriated funds was higher than they'd initially suspected. However, so far, they lacked definitive evidence pointing to any one individual. Still, several high-level names showed up repeatedly in emails and memos. There was undeniable mention of a top executive who had pressured Laura and obstructed her social responsibility program. Though they had no direct proof to accuse Travis yet, it was getting harder to separate him from the scheme. For safety's sake, both Isabella and Charles decided to keep a low profile. They didn't want to alert any potential culprit until they had ironclad evidence. Wrapping up their conversation, they both noticed Andrew at the end of the hallway, staring into space. They realized that beyond the corporate conspiracy, the CEO was in the midst of a personal transformation for which he was unprepared. On one hand, he was battling his businessman's drive for excellence. On the other, he was beginning to feel a genuine attachment to Sophia, an attachment that was eroding his usual focus. When Andrew arrived home that evening, he was greeted by the low murmur of the television and the soft cries of the baby. Marta Lopez gave him a brief rundown of the day. Sophia had been fussy, showing mild discomfort that required non-stop attention. Exhausted, her uniform wrinkled, Marta admitted she'd barely had a moment to sit. But seeing her boss come in, worn out yet purposeful, she felt a trace of relief. Andrew's increasing involvement with the child was evident, no matter how much he tried to deny it. In a hesitant voice, Andrew asked Marta to let him try calming Sophia. The nanny, surprised, nodded and left the room. He approached the crib slowly, where the tiny girl was squirming restlessly and crying as though in despair. His heart clenched at the sight. Clumsily, he picked her up and pressed her against his chest. Sophia protested briefly, letting out a little wail, but then seemed to recognize the warmth of his embrace. Her tiny hands clutched at Andrew's shirt, and her eyelids began to droop. Within minutes, the baby was breathing calmly, nestled against the man who still carried the reputation of an unyielding executive to the outside world. To his own surprise, Andrew felt his heart rate settle. It had been a day filled with tension and veiled threats at the board meeting, plus the doubts Charles had raised. Yet in that quiet moment, his mind was free from charts, figures, and external pressures. Simply holding Sophia seemed to revive a part of himself he thought had fallen dormant. Marta, watching from the half-open door, chose not to break the moment. Isabella, who arrived at that instant, saw the whole scene, a vulnerable but protective Andrew. They might not have known it then, but the bond forming with little Sophia would become the driving force to face the shadows threatening his world. And so, in the hush of the night, another step was taken toward the man Andrew could become, further from his fears and closer to his own humanity. The days passed, and tension continued to escalate in Andrew Carter's life. While office alarms rang about potential internal conflicts, life at home turned into a daily test. Sophia's crying and the endless video calls he couldn't postpone. Amid this whirlwind, an unexpected development rattled his already chaotic routine. Marta Lopez, the nanny, confided to Isabella that Laura Gomez had phoned her days before giving birth, panicked over some threats she'd received. According to Marta, Laura told her she had uncovered something serious at TechWave and feared for her safety. Though she provided no names or specifics, Sophia's mother mentioned a remote location outside the city where she could hide if things got worse. Marta, shocked and unsure how to help, had only encouraged her to seek legal support or trust Andrew. But Laura ended the call abruptly and never reached out again. With this new information, Isabella realized Laura's disappearance wasn't purely a personal matter. If she had fled, perhaps it was out of fear of retaliation tied to the suspected embezzlements they'd uncovered. Worried, Isabella shared her discovery with Charles Smith, who immediately grasped the implications. If there was any chance of finding Laura, it was vital to protect Andrew's credibility, and in the process, find out who was truly pulling the strings in the dark scheme that threatened TechWave. "We can't rely solely on the police," Charles told Isabella, his expression serious. "It's best to hire a private investigator to track Laura down. If she testifies and shows convincing proof, we can unravel any accusations or internal attacks." The idea made sense but posed a major dilemma. Involving more people increased the risk that Travis Velasco, or whoever was behind the embezzlement, might catch wind of their plans. Even so, given the circumstances, both Charles and Isabella agreed it was worth taking that risk to finally bring the mystery into the light. Meanwhile, a media storm descended on TechWave like an avalanche. A slew of sensational headlines emerged from a prominent business publication and spread across social media. The CEO who swapped deals for diapers, distracted by fatherhood, is TechWave's future at stake, and other articles hinting that Andrew couldn't handle his responsibilities. The public backlash grew louder when it came to light that the company was experiencing financial turbulence. At the same time, the CEO was caught in an unexpected family drama. To both Charles and Isabella, it was obvious someone had leaked the story to the journalist, and all signs pointed to Travis Velasco. The off-the-record comments, citing unnamed sources close to the board, referenced internal mistrust of Andrew's leadership. Without direct proof to incriminate Travis, all they could do was watch as TechWave's and its CEO's reputations wavered under each new report. With the rumor mill in full swing, Andrew found himself at a crossroads. On one hand, he knew finding Laura could be the key to dismantling the machinations of those looking to oust him from the company. On the other, he felt weighed down by headlines tarnishing his name and by partners asking when he would firmly reassert control. To make matters worse, Sophia demanded more and more attention. Her constant cries, urgent pediatric visits, and the complete upheaval of his apartment kept him perpetually on edge. During one especially chaotic afternoon, Isabella found him in his office, staring blankly at his laptop screen, where a backlog of messages from worried shareholders filled his inbox, concerned about TechWave's temporarily dropping stock. She approached carefully, and in a gentle tone, reminded him they couldn't neglect either the baby or the investigation into Laura. "If we let these accusations escalate, you'll lose your position as CEO," Isabella warned. "But if you abandon Sophia or ignore Laura's disappearance, you'll end up repeating your father's story." Her words hit home. Andrew looked at her for a moment, reading the sincerity in her eyes and the affection she still harbored, despite their past falling out. At last, he took a deep breath and admitted he couldn't sacrifice his daughter just to protect the company. Nor was he prepared to abandon the search for truth. He had to be the man who confronted both challenges at once, even if it consumed every ounce of his energy. That night, he gave Charles the green light. He would hire a private investigator, as quietly as possible, to find Laura. At the same time, he would strengthen his presence at TechWave, striving to balance Sophia's upbringing with running the company. While holding the now calmer baby, he understood that amid the collision of family and corporate tensions, his real challenge was to stay focused on what mattered most, protecting the one who depended on him while also clearing his name of any stains that could bring him down. The decision was made. The search for Laura would become a strategic priority, not just for the company, but also for the integrity of a family that was, however chaotically, beginning to form. And though the path ahead was uncertain, Andrew felt a renewed determination, spurred on by the little one who had so suddenly become the center of his life. The day dawned with a restless air. Andrew, who had gotten up early to review some pending reports, suddenly heard Sophia crying in a different way than usual. Entering the bedroom, Marta pointed out with concern that the baby was burning up with fever. A quick check with a thermometer confirmed their fears. Sophia's temperature was dangerously high. Without hesitating, Andrew left his phone and the stack of documents on the table, scooped the child into his arms, and instructed his driver to take them straight to the hospital. On the way, He recalled the last time he had set foot in that place after finding out he was a father. This time, however, everything felt more real, more intense. Between Sophia's cries and the adrenaline coursing through him, he realized just how vulnerable he felt when his daughter's health was at stake. Upon arriving at the emergency room, the doctors examined the baby and admitted her for close monitoring. Thankfully, her condition didn't appear serious. The physicians mentioned a likely common viral infection, but advised observation to rule out complications. While Sophia rested under the effects of the medication, Andrew stayed by her side, ignoring the constant buzzing of his phone. People at the office were calling for his signature on agreements and for answers to urgent emails. But at that moment, nothing mattered more to him than making sure his daughter was stable. Marta also stayed, attentive to the nurse's instructions, and relieved to see that, despite her fever, the baby was responding well to treatment. Meanwhile, back at TechWave headquarters, the atmosphere was tense. Seizing on Andrew's absence, Travis Velasco called an extraordinary board meeting. Exuding arrogance, he argued that the CEO was missing at a critical juncture and that the company couldn't afford such a level of improvisation. Some board members, shaken by the bad press spotlighting TechWave's instability, were receptive to Travis's proposals to limit Andrew's power or even remove him from his position temporarily. However, the meeting took an unexpected turn when Julia Carter appeared in the boardroom. Worried by the rumors reaching her ears, she had decided to come to the company and stand up for her brother. Julia, though not officially part of the board, asked to speak with a determination that caught everyone off guard. She reminded them that in TechWave's early days, Andrew had sacrificed nights and weekends to build the business from scratch. She stressed that his extraordinary dedication couldn't be questioned because of a temporary personal crisis. Julia spoke passionately about Andrew's unwavering enthusiasm for innovation and his commitment to job creation and sustained growth. A few board members nodded silently, remembering the days when TechWave was no more than a handful of offices and a small team that believed wholeheartedly in Andrew's vision. Travis, for his part, remained impassive, aware that Julia's intervention was complicating his plan. Even so, the vote proceeded and resulted in a compromise. Andrew would be allowed to remain CEO, but a supervisory committee would be appointed to oversee key decision-making. Despite this new check on Andrew's authority, Travis still considered it a step toward his ultimate goal. During this time, Charles Smith and Isabella Martinez continued refining the internal investigation into the misappropriation of funds linked to Laura Gomez's philanthropic foundation. In the last few hours, they had gained access to a bank account with suspicious activity pointing directly to a high-level executive. Cross-referencing transfer data, emails, and signed authorizations all but confirmed that executive's identity as Travis Velasco. Charles, in disbelief, pored over the evidence again and again, struggling to accept that someone so senior would risk the company's reputation for personal gain. Once they were sure, he and Isabella rushed to inform Julia, recognizing that, for the moment, she was Andrew's best ally while he remained at the hospital. Though they lacked proof solid enough for a legal case, the pile of indications was overwhelming. All they needed was Laura's testimony, if she turned up, or a document irrefutably linking Travis to the embezzlement scheme. Outraged, Julia wanted to confront the board immediately to reveal everything. However, Charles persuaded her to hold off for the right moment so they wouldn't tip off Travis prematurely and jeopardize their chance to fully expose his corruption. At the hospital, Sophia's fever gradually subsided. Exhausted but relieved, Andrew rocked her in his arms, fully aware that a storm awaited him at the office once he left there. Still, something within him had grown stronger. For hours, he had focused on his daughter's heartbeat, feeling a love so powerful it swept away much of his usual anxiety. By the end of the day, Sophia was out of danger, and they were allowed to go home. With the baby settled in her crib and Marta by her side, Andrew finally checked his piled-up messages. For a moment, it felt as though the world was collapsing around him. confirmations of the newly imposed oversight structure, emails from uneasy investors, and a barrage of commentary questioning his leadership. But a glimmer of hope appeared on his screen in a message from Julia titled "Good News." In it, his sister explained that Charles and Isabella had made progress in their investigation and were inching closer to proving that Travis was behind the corruption, threatening to bring the company down. Although Andrew was under more pressure than ever, his bond with Sophia had never been stronger, and the support of his closest allies bolstered his conviction to fight to the end. As night fell over the city, the CEO sat beside the crib, watching his daughter sleep. Deep down, he felt a renewed drive to protect both the little girl and the company he had built with such dedication. Even if the crisis was growing worse, he knew that each step brought him nearer to exposing Travis and preserving his place as both a father and a leader. The next morning broke with a hopeful glimmer, a stark contrast to the cloud of uncertainty that had hovered over TechWave and Andrew Carter in recent days. Charles Smith and Isabella Martinez had been fully immersed in their investigation, gathering evidence that implicated Travis Velasco in the embezzlement of funds for Laura Gomez's philanthropic project. Finally, their efforts paid off when the private detective they had hired managed to locate Laura, discreetly hiding in a small charitable organization on the outskirts of the city. Andrew received the call with a mix of anxiety and relief. Heart pounding, he met Charles and Isabella at a quiet cafe, safely away from prying eyes. The detective was there, accompanied by a woman who, despite her time away, still carried herself with unshakable dignity. It was Laura Gomez. "Mr. Carter," the detective began, "she's here and willing to talk." Andrew rose slowly, his face reflecting both nervousness and determination. Laura held his gaze, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. The little girl he barely knew was now resting in the arms of Marta Lopez, who had been instrumental in keeping Sophia safe during Laura's absence. "Andrew," Laura said softly but firmly, "it's time to clear everything up." From her spot inside the cafe, Marta watched the scene closely. Overcome by the tension, she moved closer to Isabella and, in a low voice, confessed, "I've known something about this from the start. Laura asked me for help, but I was terrified of what might happen to Sophia if I spoke out." Isabella, her gaze full of concern, nodded in sympathy, grasping how much risk Marta had taken in keeping silent. Andrew took a seat across from Laura, with Charles and Isabella by his side. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, and an imminent truth was poised to be revealed. "Laura, thank you for meeting with us," Andrew said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I need to understand why you disappeared, and how Travis is involved in all of this." Laura drew a deep breath before speaking, her eyes reflecting both the pain and resolve of someone who had endured a great deal. "Andrew, Sophia is your daughter. I knew that once you discovered the truth, Travis would stop at nothing to ensure you kept your position at TechWave, on his terms. He siphoned funds from the foundation for personal gain, and when I found out, he started threatening me, not only for my safety, but for Sophia's as well." Andrew felt his throat tighten. Hearing that Sophia truly was his child hit him harder than he'd anticipated, but at the same time, it was a relief to finally understand. "I didn't want to involve you," Laura went on. "I thought I could handle it myself, but the threats became unbearable. I had to run to protect us." "What kind of threats?" Andrew asked, his voice unsteady. "Travis knew that if he revealed you had a daughter, he could use that against you, calling your leadership into question. Plus, he manipulated the financial reports to skim funds and make sure any attempt to clear your name would fail." Charles stepped in, showing the evidence they had gathered, emails, bank transfers, and memos that directly tied Travis to the irregularities. "This is everything we've uncovered," Isabella said, handing the documents to Laura. "We need your testimony to end this." Laura nodded, aware that the time had come to face the truth. She looked at Andrew, who was holding Sophia tenderly. "I'm willing to come back and testify," she affirmed, but I need assurances that Sophia will be safe and that the philanthropic project can continue without interference." Andrew, tears in his eyes, reached for Laura's hand and promised, "I'll do everything in my power to protect you and Sophia. I'll also make sure TechWave keeps supporting and expanding the project you started. I won't let your work be destroyed by one man's greed." The resolve in Andrew's words strengthened Laura's determination. She knew that with his support, they could finally expose Travis and restore the company's good name. Meanwhile, at TechWave, the media pressure continued to mount. Headlines were no longer just about a CEO distracted by fatherhood. They now focused on potential financial irregularities that threatened the company's stability. News quickly spread that Laura had been found and was ready to testify, causing an even bigger stir. Fully aware that his time was running out, Travis Velasco tried to discredit Laura and unsettle Andrew. However, the mounting evidence and Julia Carter's unwavering support rendered his efforts futile. The night before the final showdown, Andrew sat beside Sophia, gently rocking her as he reflected on everything that had happened. Laura's presence and the confirmation of his fatherhood had profoundly changed him. He was no longer just a cold, calculating businessman. He had become a father determined to protect both his daughter and his company from any threat. The confrontation with Travis Velasco was imminent, but Andrew would no longer face it alone. Backed by his family, friends, and the truth that Laura had unveiled, he felt prepared for the final battle that would define his future and TechWave's. With a determined sigh, Andrew looked toward the window, watching the city lights glow with renewed hope. He knew that although the road ahead would be difficult, he was finally moving toward a resolution that would bring justice, reconciliation, and a fresh start for everyone. TechWave's boardroom was thick with palpable tension. Andrew Carter, accompanied by Charles Smith, Isabella Martinez, and Laura Gomez, had carefully prepared his presentation. An air of anticipation hung over the board members taking their seats, their expressions shifting between curiosity and skepticism. Andrew knew this meeting would shape not only the future of the company, but his own destiny within it. Steeling himself, Andrew opened the meeting. "Thank you all for being here at this critical moment. Today, we're not just discussing TechWave's direction, but also clearing our company's name of baseless accusations and rooting out internal corruption that has threatened our integrity." Charles Smith spoke next, presenting a folder packed with documents exposing the financial wrongdoing perpetrated by Travis Velasco. "We've compiled emails, bank transactions, and meeting logs that clearly show the misappropriation of funds intended for Laura Gomez's philanthropic project. These pieces of evidence leave no room for doubt about Travis's involvement in these corrupt acts." Isabella, meticulous as ever, added crucial details. "Besides the embezzlement, we found multiple threats aimed at Laura and me, intended to silence us and derail the investigation. The communications demonstrate Travis's clear intent to maintain absolute control of TechWave at the expense of ethics and legality." Laura Gomez, her voice calm yet resolute, spoke up. "I've not only been a victim of these corrupt practices, but was also targeted with intimidation to protect Travis's interests. My commitment to TechWave and to the social responsibility program I spearheaded was never in question. Now, I see how my work was used as a front for his personal gain." The evidence presented was overwhelming. The board members exchanged murmured comments, passing looks of disbelief and condemnation among themselves. Andrew continued, displaying screenshots of conversations in which Travis tried to coerce him into ignoring the financial irregularities, as well as proof of suspicious transfers tying Travis directly to the scheme. "TechWave's integrity is at stake," Andrew concluded. "We can't allow one of our own executives to destroy everything we've built. We must act decisively and fairly." Seated at the far end of the table, Travis Velasco tried to maintain a facade of composure, but nervousness flickered across his face. "These are unfounded slanders. There's no conclusive proof. I'm here to defend my name and my work at TechWave." But the evidence provided by Charles, Isabella, and Laura was irrefutable. The documented proof and first-hand accounts left no room for reasonable doubt. After a brief deliberation, the board of directors reached a unanimous decision. Travis Velasco, your actions have blatantly violated TechWave's ethical and legal standards, announced the board president, his voice unyielding. We are dismissing you from your position with immediate effect. A murmur of approval rippled through the room while Travis tried, unsuccessfully, to object. The board ordered a formal internal investigation and reported the illegal activities to the relevant authorities. TechWave's reputation quickly began to recover, thanks to Andrew and his team's transparency. With the threat removed, Andrew took a moment to breathe deeply. He had protected his company, and more importantly, shown his commitment both to TechWave and to his new family. Addressing the board, he gave a sincere smile. Thank you all for your trust. TechWave will not only survive this crisis, it will emerge stronger. I promise to lead with integrity and honor the social project Laura began, ensuring that corporate responsibility remains a priority for all of us. The atmosphere in the boardroom shifted from tense to hopeful. Confidence in Andrew solidified, reaffirming his role as a visionary, dedicated leader. As the meeting wrapped up, Andrew felt relief and gratitude wash over him. Later, at his penthouse, Andrew and Julia stood in the living room, where family tension had given way to a moment of reconciliation. Julia stepped forward and hugged her brother warmly. I knew you could do it, Julia whispered, tears in her eyes. I always knew there was more to you than just your job. Andrew returned the embrace, sensing that old family wounds were finally starting to heal. Sophia's presence, along with his sister's support, reminded him how vital family ties were, ties he had neglected for so long. Later that evening, Andrew met with Charles and Isabella in his office. I couldn't have done this without you, he said, acknowledging their loyalty and hard work. We're a team, Andrew, Charles replied with a grin. We've always believed in you and in what we do here. Isabella nodded. Your leadership was key to getting us this far. Now, with Laura and the philanthropic project, TechWave's future will be brighter and more ethical. Glancing at the people who had been instrumental in his fight, Andrew said, Thank you. I'm committed to being not just a better CEO, but a better father and brother as well. Feeling a new sense of purpose and fulfillment, Andrew walked to the window and looked out at the city lights, sparkling with optimism. He had overcome one of the toughest trials of his life, and with the backing of his family and friends, he was ready to face any challenge the future might bring. The battle for TechWave was over, and Andrew Carter had emerged not only as a successful leader, but a redeemed man, dedicated to the people who mattered most in his life. Now, months later, Laura Gomez had officially returned to Andrew's and Sophia's lives, bringing the peace that came from resolving misunderstandings and conflicts that had nearly derailed both the company and their fledgling family. Laura moved back into the penthouse with a calm, determined presence. They'd arranged a shared custody agreement for Sophia, ensuring the little girl received love and attention from both parents without discord. Moreover, the continuation of the philanthropic project Laura had initiated was firmly secured, with Andrew pledging to fund and expand the initiatives under Laura's direct supervision. Their cooperation not only strengthened TechWave, but also established a professional and personal relationship built on mutual trust and respect. On a personal level, Andrew and Isabella Martinez had decided to rekindle their relationship. Having overcome past tensions, both recognized the importance of approaching their bond with greater maturity and openness. No longer were their interactions marked by discomfort and painful memories. Instead, they shared a renewed sense of understanding and mutual support. Isabella, who had played a key role in uncovering Travis Velasco's corruption, now saw in Andrew not just a boss, but a partner, willing to open up and share both professional and personal responsibilities. Life in Andrew's home had changed dramatically as well. Sophia had settled into her new surroundings, adjusting to her father's home with a more stable routine, thanks to the constant help of Marta Lopez. The nanny, now an integral part of the family, had managed to create a warm, welcoming environment where the little girl could grow safely and happily. The once austere, minimalist penthouse was now brightened with soft colors and scattered toys, evoking a sense of home and affection. At TechWave, internal restructuring began, aiming to eliminate any trace of corruption and strengthen transparency controls. Under Laura Gomez's guidance, new corporate social responsibility (CSR) protocols were introduced, aligning the company with higher ethical standards and boosting its commitment to the community. Laura contributed her experience and insight, ensuring each philanthropic initiative produced a real, positive impact, while Andrew supervised the rollout with a renewed, well-balanced dedication. Andrew's workday ended with a feeling of accomplishment and satisfaction. Closing his office door behind him, he headed to the living room where Sophia was playing with her toys, happily waving her tiny arms. Sitting down beside her, he picked up the baby and watched as her face lit up with a pure, sincere smile. In those moments, all his pressures and responsibilities seemed to disappear, replaced by an unconditional love he was only just beginning to understand. That evening, after a productive day, Julia Carter visited her brother at the penthouse. When she entered, she found Andrew playing with Sophia, laughing and singing lullabies to her. The image of her brother, relaxed and happy, was a striking contrast to the cold, distant man she was used to seeing. Julia felt both relief and pride at how much Andrew had changed, embracing his role as a father with a tenderness she had never seen in him before. "You've done well, Andrew," Julia said, watching her little niece turn in her brother's arms. "I'm happy to see you've found balance." Andrew smiled, placing Sophia in her crib so he could hug his sister. Old family wounds were beginning to heal, replaced by a new sense of understanding and mutual support. "Thank you, Julia. I couldn't have managed it without everyone's help," Andrew replied, acknowledging how vital his family and his team had been in his transformation. Later, at the office, Andrew met with Charles and Isabella to discuss the next steps for the philanthropic project. With the corruption rooted out and TechWave's integrity restored, the company was ready for a new era of transparency and social responsibility. Laura presented a series of initiatives that would not only benefit communities in need, but also boost TechWave's reputation as a company committed to global well-being. By the end of the day, Andrew returned home feeling fulfilled. He sat on the sofa, watching Sophia sleep peacefully in her crib. His heart filled with gratitude as he recalled all that he had overcome: corporate crises, family tensions, and his unexpected role as a father. He had emerged from the storm stronger and more complete, with renewed purpose and unwavering love for his daughter. Before leaving, Julia wrote him a note of encouragement and recognition, reminding him that he had managed to heal and build a more balanced, meaningful life. Smiling, Andrew closed the door behind his sister, sensing that he was finally on the right path to a richer, more satisfying life. Gazing toward the future, Andrew imagined a more ethical and committed TechWave, a close-knit family, and a heart brimming with love. The journey that began with an unexpected phone call had culminated in a new beginning, one in which his priorities had shifted and the shadows had given way to the light of a renewed life. With the city lights shining in the distance and Sophia smiling in his arms, Andrew felt ready for whatever challenges the future might bring. He knew that, with his family and team by his side, he was prepared to build a legacy of success and goodness, proving that even the loneliest heart can find happiness and redemption. And so, filled with hope and determination, Andrew Carter embraced his new beginning, ready to write the next chapter of his life, one filled with love, justice, and prosperity for all those around him. The story of Andrew Carter is a powerful testament to transformation and redemption. In his pursuit of business success, Andrew had constructed a life of material achievement, but was devoid of deep emotional connections. His obsession with work left him isolated, neglecting the warmth of family and genuine love. However, the unexpected arrival of Sophia in his life shattered the ice around his solitary existence, forcing him to confront realities he had never considered. Through his relationship with his daughter, Andrew discovered the importance of balancing professional responsibilities with personal ones, learning that true success isn't measured solely by numbers and accomplishments, but also by the capacity to love and be loved. The fight against internal corruption at TechWave symbolizes his internal battle to evolve and improve. Confronting Travis Velasco and purging his company of dishonest practices not only protected his corporate legacy, but also demonstrated his integrity and commitment to doing what was right. This showdown marked the start of a new era for TechWave, one built on transparency and social responsibility that reflected Andrew's personal growth. His reconciliation with his sister, Julia, and the rekindling of his relationship with Isabella underscore the importance of human connections and mutual support. Andrew learned to value those around him, realizing that shared success is more meaningful than any individual achievement. Sophia's constant presence was a daily reminder that his greatest responsibility and source of happiness lay in his role as a father. Ultimately, Andrew emerges as a renewed man, not just by overcoming corporate challenges, but by embracing his humanity and his family ties. His story teaches us that it's never too late to change, to open ourselves to love, and to rebuild the connections that truly matter. This tale is a celebration of human resilience, of our ability to reinvent ourselves, and of the power of love to transform lives. It invites us to reflect on our own priorities and to realize that, in balancing professional success with our personal lives, we find true fulfillment. Andrew Carter shows us that, at the end of it all, what truly lasts are the relationships we forge and the hearts we touch, reminding us that our true legacy lies not in what we build, but in how we love and connect with others. And that's how we conclude the exciting story of Andrew Carter and his personal transformation. We hope you've enjoyed every chapter and that Andrew's journey has inspired you as much as it has inspired us. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of our future stories. Thank you for joining us, and until the next adventure,